This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about something quieter and much more dangerous. Because what just happened did not require an invasion. It did not require a vote. It did not even require consensus. It required speed, uncertainty, and a system willing to treat unpredictability as power. For a brief moment, it looked decisive, efficient, almost impressive. Markets reacted. Executives leaned forward. The machinery moved, and then it stalled. Not because of protest, not because of resistance, but because the people who actually make long-term decisions paused. That pause matters. If you want to understand where power really lives now, stay with me. Because this story isn't about what was taken. It's about what can no longer be trusted. And once trust breaks at the system level, nothing else works the way you think it does. That's where this begins. We are trained to look for villains, for leaders, for names we can attach responsibility to. But that instinct is now outdated. What actually controls this system is not ideology. It is not diplomacy. It is not even force. It is time horizon. Short-term authority now collides with long-term capital. And capital has learned something the system hasn't admitted yet. Power that cannot promise continuity is no longer power. It is leverage with an expiration date. The state can move fast, shock markets, freeze assets, change the rules overnight. But the system that funds, repairs, builds, and maintains reality does not move on impulse. It calculates risk across decades, across administrations, across reversals. And when those calculations break, the system doesn't rebel. It simply refuses to commit. That refusal is invisible at first. No headlines, no outrage, just hesitation. And hesitation in a system built on momentum is how control quietly slips away. Because once the rules can be rewritten at will, every rule becomes provisional. And provisional systems do not attract loyalty. They attract exits. That's the shift you're seeing. And it's only starting. This didn't happen overnight. That's the most dangerous part. There was a time when instability was the exception. A crisis, a deviation that demanded correction. Now it's a feature. Before, decisions were slow on purpose because slowness signaled durability. It told everyone involved, this will still matter tomorrow. Now speed is celebrated. Announcements replace agreements. Declarations replace structures. Before, power came from predictability, from knowing that if you signed today, the rules would still exist years from now. Now, power comes from surprise, from the ability to move faster than anyone can react. And at first, that looks like strength. But over time, something subtle happens. Risk stops being priced correctly. Commitment becomes optional. Long-term planning turns irrational. The system adapts by shrinking its expectations, not collapsing, not resisting, just quietly lowering the bar. And once that becomes normal, once volatility becomes the baseline, the system no longer asks whether something is stable. It asks how quickly it can escape. That's not a headline. It's a drift. And drift is how systems fail without anyone noticing, until something snaps. Then came the demonstration. Fast, clean, overwhelming. A leader removed, control asserted, resources effectively frozen in place. No prolonged fighting, no occupation. Just a system applying pressure at exactly the right points. On paper, it worked. Assets surged. Confidence spiked. There was talk of immediate restoration, of investment flowing back in, of productivity returning to historic highs. But that moment of apparent success was the signal, not the solution. Because the shock didn't reveal strength. It revealed exposure. The same move that showed how easily control could be imposed also showed how easily it could be reversed. Behind closed doors, the conversations changed. Not about whether the action was legal, not about whether it was justified. about whether it was survivable. Long-term projects don't fear disruption. They fear arbitrary disruption. And what looked like decisive leadership to the public looked like a flashing warning light to the people who would have to commit real capital. They saw the efficiency and they saw the precedent and they stopped. That pause was the crisis. Because once capital hesitates after a show of force, the show stops working. And the next move becomes harder. Here's the mechanism most people miss. This system doesn't run on orders. It runs on guarantees. Not moral guarantees, not political promises, contractual ones, temporal ones. Who absorbs the loss if this goes wrong? Who enforces the deal if power changes hands? Who still exists to honor the agreement 5 years from now? In theory, the state provides that backstop. It makes risk calculable. But when the state itself becomes the variable, the math breaks. Those closest to the machinery understand this instantly. They don't argue. They don't resist. They hedge. They delay. They say yes without committing because they know who benefits when things go right. And they know exactly who eats the damage when things don't. Short-term authority captures the upside. Long-term capital absorbs the downside. That imbalance is the hidden tax. And once it becomes obvious, participation turns optional, not publicly, privately, which means nothing explodes, nothing crashes. The system simply stops expanding. And a system that can't expand can only be maintained by force. That's not stability. That's fragility with momentum. And momentum always runs out. Now the pace accelerates. Decisions compress. Timelines collapse. Assumptions expire faster than they can be replaced. Money hesitates, then pulls back. Not dramatically, incrementally. Projects stall. Upgrades wait. Maintenance is deferred. No press release announces this. No single moment marks it. But the system feels it. Pressure builds in places no one is watching. Supply chains thin. Redundancy disappears because redundancy costs money. And money is cautious now. The state responds the only way it knows how. More pressure, more speed, more certainty declared, not earned. That works once, maybe twice. Then the reactions shorten. Each move produces less compliance. Each escalation buys less time. And the danger isn't collapse. Collapse is visible. The danger is entrenchment. A system locked into forcing outcomes because it can no longer persuade participation. At that point, every action becomes higher risk. Every pause becomes a threat. And every next step must be bigger than the last. That's not strategy. That's acceleration without control. And once you're on that slope, there is no neutral gear. This is where it reaches you. Not as policy, not as foreign affairs, as friction. You feel it as delays that don't make sense, prices that don't quite settle, jobs that look solid but stop moving. Opportunities narrow, not suddenly, gradually, because when long-term investment retreats, the cost doesn't disappear. It shifts onto workers who can't hedge, onto consumers who can't wait, onto communities that depend on continuity they never controlled. You are told things are strong. That action is being taken. That leverage is working. And in the short term, it might be, but you are living inside the long term, inside a system where instability quietly taxes everything: time, planning, trust. And when trust erodes, you compensate by being cautious. You delay, you downsize expectations, you stop betting on the future. That's the human signal. And when enough people do that at once, the system doesn't need to fail. It just slows until forward motion feels risky. That's not fear. That's adaptation. And adaptation, once it sets in, is very hard to reverse because it feels rational. This is where it stops being domestic, because systems like this don't fail in isolation. They echo Partners start recalculating, not publicly, quietly. They watch how rules are changed, how contracts are discarded, how legitimacy is declared after the fact. And they learn not that power is dangerous. They already knew that. They learn that alignment is temporary, that today's guarantee may not survive tomorrow's mood. That proximity does not equal protection. So they diversify. They reroute. They shorten exposure. Supply chains bend away. Capital looks for jurisdictions where boredom still exists, where nothing dramatic happens, because boring systems are predictable, and predictable systems are valuable. This isn't retaliation, it's insurance. But insurance has consequences. Influence thins, standards fragment, coordination weakens. And suddenly, the system that once set the terms is negotiating from inside a smaller circle, still powerful, still loud, but no longer central by default. That's the ripple. And once it spreads far enough, pulling it back requires something this system no longer offers easily: time. From here, there are only three directions this can go. The first is adjustment. Rules are slowed. Guarantees are rebuilt. Continuity is made boring again. That path is quiet, unshowy, and slow. It requires accepting limits, letting some leverage go unused, allowing institutions to outlive personalities. The second is erosion. Nothing dramatic breaks. The system keeps functioning, but with less reach, less trust, less willingness to commit. Power still exists. It just costs more to use. Each intervention delivers diminishing returns. Each success requires greater force than the last. And then there is rupture, not collapse, not chaos. A moment when a critical actor refuses to absorb the risk anymore, when hesitation becomes refusal, when the system discovers that speed cannot replace legitimacy. That doesn't announce itself. It arrives disguised as a reasonable decision, a delay, a pause, a recalculation. Which path we're on isn't clear yet, because systems rarely declare their direction in advance. They reveal it only after momentum has carried them too far to stop. And that uncertainty is the most dangerous variable of all. This is where the mistake usually happens. People look for an ending, a verdict, a lesson that restores balance. There isn't one yet, because this story isn't about failure. It's about exposure, about what happens when a system proves it can act, but cannot promise that its actions will still matter tomorrow. That kind of power feels intoxicating, fast, decisive, until it teaches everyone else to stop trusting it. And trust, once withdrawn, does not return on command. It returns slowly, or it doesn't return at all. So the real question isn't whether this approach works today. It's what kind of system it creates for the next crisis. One where participation is voluntary, or one where compliance must be forced. If you want to understand what happens next, don't watch the speeches. Watch the pauses. Watch the hesitations. Watch who quietly chooses not to engage. That's where the future is being decided. If you want to follow this further, stay with me. Because the next time this system moves fast, the cost may not be hidden anymore.